Hello, and welcome to Tackle Technology. Thank you so much for stopping by and taking the time to watch our video. We are so fortunate to have a special guest with us here today. For those of you who do not know him, this is Jerry Weissman, a superstar when it comes to technology and adapting it to meet specific individuals' needs. I will be sure to post more information about him if you want to read more about some of his impressive accomplishments. So the term technology concierge actually came from Jerry, and I am so excited to have him here today to explain what a technology concierge is and where that term came from. So Jerry, you are an established rehabilitation engineer. Would you mind starting by explaining what a rehabilitation engineer is to our viewers who might not be familiar with that term?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you. Rehab engineering, the term rehab engineering got started in the early 70s. And it was at a time when there was a lot of need for assistive technologies and technologies applied to the needs of people with disabilities. And rehab engineering and the term rehab engineering came about because there were biomedical engineers and other kinds of engineers who worked with medical professionals, doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and so on, and brought their engineering skills to the problems of people with disabilities. So it's about engineers and technologists who solve problems for people with disabilities, particularly around assistive technologies, with their engineering skills, and in collaboration with healthcare and medical professionals.
So a lot of teamwork. And this is such a valuable job, and it sounds like you've changed the lives of many people. So how did you decide you wanted to become a rehabilitation engineer?
That's kind of a long story, longer than we have time for. But suffice it to say that originally I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. And I wanted to design airplanes. In the late 60s and early 70s, I was being interviewed for college, and the fellow who was interviewing me for college said, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to design planes. He said, there's only one group of people who have enough money to design new planes. Do you know what that is? And I said, the government. He said, and what kind of planes does the government design? And I said, warplanes. And this was at the height of the Vietnam War, and I was busy protesting the Vietnam War. And he said, is that what you want to do? And it gave me, made me think about what it was I really wanted to do. And then on top of that, my father once introduced me to a friend of his and told me that I was studying to be an engineer, and I was going to help people. He told me that I should use my engineering skills to help people. So between not designing airplanes and wanting to help people, after I graduated college, I found the field of bioengineering, biomechanics, and went to grad school to study that. And then it grew from there. And then there was an interaction I had with a physical therapist who was responsible for a lot of the special needs kids in Vermont. And it was at a time when there wasn't very many assistive technology devices. And she asked to help her design wheelchairs or wheelchair seating for the kids that she was working with. And at the time, there really wasn't much in the way of commercially available equipment. So I started a business while I was still in grad school, helping her design wheelchair seating. And I shared a shop with a friend of mine who made guitars. So he was making guitars and I was making wheelchair seats. And then it soon became apparent to me that I didn't know what I was doing. So I got my master's degree and then went off to become a rehab engineer with the VA, and then the rest of it is history.
Great. Well, thanks for deciding to go into this field, and I know a lot of people have benefited for sure. So here at Tackle Technology, as we train people how to use the technology in ways they want to use it, we also help them customize the settings to make it more natural for them to use. You have an impressive background as a rehabilitation engineer, and you have made a career out of personalizing the environments people work in, live in. I would imagine you've seen many changes in technology over the years. Do you recall an example of when you needed to get creative and piece together many different items to accomplish a goal that can now be done with a single smart device?
Well, the fact that I've been in the business for going on 45 years means that I've seen a lot of changes, not just in the field of assistive technology and rehab engineering, but in the world and in technology itself. So when I got, my background is in mechanical engineering, and a lot of what I did early in my career was job accommodations. And it was at a time when we still made a lot of things in the United States, in America. Over the last 46 years, that's changed. We don't make nearly as many things as we used to. So where I used to be able to do job accommodations for people in, say, a manufacturing environment, that's changed. There's fewer jobs in manufacturing environment than there were, 30, 40 years ago. The biggest change in technology that's happened for everybody, not the least of which for people with disabilities, is the computer. Keep in mind that when I got started in this business, there was no such thing as a personal computer. As a matter of fact, when I went into college, I was still using a slide rule. So that explains a lot of my gray hair and no hair and that kind of stuff. But in the early 80s and mid 80s, when personal computers became available, it did a lot to level the playing field for people with disabilities. Because now, as long as they had access to that technology, they could do anything anybody else could do. And because of people like Greg Vanderheiden and some other folks, even in the very early personal computers, especially the Apple II, there were accessibility features built into those computers that enabled people with disabilities and functional limitations to use the computers. And those things became standard in all computers. If you go out and buy a computer, all you have to do is go into the settings and look for, the wording is different for different operating systems, but basically it's the accessibility features in any computer. And if you have visual impairments, if you have physical impairments, upper extremity impairments, those accommodations are built into the computers now, because there's a recognition that there's no such thing as the average person. So everybody's got some kind of functional limitation. It could be because of age, it could be because of injury, it could be because of disease. Whatever it is, we all have something. If I take my glasses off, I'm not going to be able to see. So I think things have changed over the last 40 some odd years, and the kinds of technology that we use to accommodate people with disabilities have changed. But I think one of the biggest changes is the fact that there's a recognition that not everybody is quote unquote normal, and not everybody has the same abilities. So there's a need for all these different kind of modifications and accommodations, and they're built in. And I think that makes a big difference for everybody.
So we're very lucky to live in the world we live in with all these customizable technologies and the different features of these tools in our pockets. So do you think that changes or advancements in legislation around accessibility have had an influence on the number of customizable options we have on our computers, phones, televisions, and other electronics today?
Absolutely. If it wasn't for some of this legislation, we wouldn't see a lot of those settings in computers. If you look at Section 508 of the Rehab Act, the government said to manufacturers of computers, you don't have to do this. You don't have to make your computers accessible, but we're not going to buy them if you don't. So given the fact that the government buys a lot of computers, it behooved any manufacturer of a computer to put those features in their devices. And that's the way the government kind of worked. So there was a great incentive because of the legislation. Then legislation like the ADA and Title III of the ADA that said all public accommodations needed to be accessible. So that if you provided services or products to the general public, you need to recognize that 20% of the public have a disability. So if you don't make it, your products and services accessible to them, you're cutting out 20% of the market. So there was an incentive to do that, not just because of legislation, but because of money and the market. Those kind, that's the legislation created these incentives for manufacturers to do it without too big of a stick. They came to understand that it was to their benefit to do this, and they weren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
Well, at the end of the day, we have all these extra features and settings in our phones and computers. And I think that's how we got talking about what a technology concierge is. So could you explain a little bit more about how that term was developed?
There was a summit that of a rehab engineering summit that occurred way back in the early 70s. And that summit was brought together people who were involved in rehab engineering field at the time. And they had a discussion about what the rehab engineering field should look like, and what it should do, and things like, should there be an organization that ultimately became RESNA? Should there be certification for these people, and so on and so forth? Well, a few years ago, we decided that it had been a long time since that summit, and that we needed to kind of revisit the future of rehab engineering and what rehab engineering was going to look like and what rehab engineers did. Because even during the time that I've been a rehab engineer, things have changed significantly, like we already talked about, mostly because of the technology. So we held another summit of rehab engineers to talk about things like, what is it going to look like in the future? What are rehab engineers going to do? What kind of services are they going to provide? What kind of research are we going to need to do? And that kind of thing. And one of the things that came up was this idea of the technologies that exist having so many different features in them that can accommodate people's functional limitations, like these settings in computers that we were just talking about. The problem with that is anybody who's gone deep into a computer setting understands that you can get lost real easy, and it's not a simple thing. As much as they try to make it sound like it's simple, it's not simple, and it takes some training to do it. It takes quite a bit of understanding about how computers work, how people with functional limitations work, and how to match the two in terms of their accommodations. So it made sense to us that where we used to make accommodations, we used to make assistive technologies from scratch. I put together 2 or 3 different machine shops so that I could build stuff. Nowadays, you don't need to build stuff. You just need to take what's off the shelf and make sure that it fits the person in terms of its settings and in terms of its accommodations. But you need enough knowledge of the technology and of the requirements of the person to be able to do that. And somebody, I'm not sure exactly who, during that summit came up with the idea of a concierge who understood enough about the technology and understood enough about how to define the problems that people with disabilities have, that they could marry the two and fix the technology. I mean, in some respects, you already see things like that occurring. If you want stereo technology, media technologies, between the televisions that we have now and all the computers and the web and all that kind of stuff, if you want to have a decent stereo system, what we used to just buy an amp and a couple of speakers and a CD player and a turntable. Nowadays, if you're going to have a decent media system, more likely than not, you're going to have to hire somebody to come in and hook it all up and run the wires through your house and so on and so forth, between the computer and the television and so on. We took that idea and applied it to the needs of people with disabilities and came up with a rehab engineering concierge, or assistive technology concierge.
Great, and I love that term, technology concierge, because as we have, like you said, it's easy to get lost in the technology. So you almost need a tour guide to help you navigate around and connect the dots of where do I need to be, what do I need to be doing, what terms do I need to be searching. So it's a great term. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So do you have any words of encouragement for someone who wants to be more active in the digital world, but feels too much like a beginner to know where to start?
It depends on what their interest in technology is. Certainly I have friends who will read the manuals of every device that they have and learn everything. I have a son-in-law that'll read every manual and understand, but he's an engineer, so he gets it. There's other people that I know who refuse to read the manuals, just absolutely refuse it. I have a friend who designs electronic equipment, and he typically, on the inside of his devices, he'll put a little sign that says, hang on a second. It says RTFM. And I'm not going to tell you, it says read, I'm not going to tell you what F means, but manual. So if somebody opens his device and wants to know how to play around in there, he suggests that you read the manual first. It all depends on a person's interests. I think somebody like a concierge works at one end of the spectrum. You know, I certainly have friends who refuse or don't want to or can't change a light bulb. Mm-hmm. Those people are not going to set up their computer or set up their media system or anything like that if they're too afraid to change the light bulb. So there's a spectrum. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of us, no matter how much skill you have in digital technology, know how to use all the buttons on a remote control. You know, and
there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody has ever read the manual to find out how to use all the buttons on the menu. You figure out the 4 you need, mm-hmm. and then you leave it at that. And God help you if you lose the remote control and the sofa cushions, you'll spend an hour looking for it because you're not going to get up and push the button on the television. So that the idea of the concierge or somebody helping you is just like any other technology. You're not going to change a light switch in your house if you don't feel comfortable playing around with electricity in your house. So you'll call the electrician. I think if people have functional limitations, most everything you buy and pull out of a box will work immediately for most everybody. But then there's 20% of the people it may not work for. So the question then is, who do you call to tweak what you have, the device that you have, to meet your specific needs? And that's the concierge, or your best friend who knows how to do it. You know?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us. We do realize how very fortunate we are to have you here today. So thank you. And I want to thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks. And so to all of you watching, this conversation teaches us that any physical or cognitive limitations should not be a barrier to trying to use new technology. Technology may even be able to help us to do things throughout our day by minimizing those limitations that might make us hesitate to start. So no one is too old or too new to start. So believe us when we say this, you can tackle technology too.